Hello, welcome back to the Geography 300 Geographical Data Analysis video series for WVU. We are now moving from the previous topic, which was on probabilities. That's part of the framework and the ground level of the concepts that we'll be using as we develop and work with our inferential statistical tests. In many, many cases, as we move to this next topic on sampling, in many cases, the inference that is happening within the inferential test is we are measuring something about a sample, a subset of the population. Recall those ideas from before, the sample versus the whole population. We have our sample, and we are trying to make sure we can do the inference from what we've measured in the sample to inferring and assuming that those properties and those relationships we measure within the sample are also going to hold true for the population as a whole. We can never be guaranteed of this, but we can be strategic in our sampling to try to make sure it's as good as possible. So this next set of videos is all about the sample. It's about sampling. And this first one is looking at, okay, if sampling is such an issue, it has uncertainty associated with it, why do we do it at all? We have 5 reasons. And I will use an illustration from research I have been involved in pretty recently to explain why, for this research, we needed a sample. This research is asking people in Appalachia about a whole range of attitudes toward COVID and the pandemic, and we were particularly asking as it was just getting going and rolling out in the spring. And so the first reason, the first issue as to why we needed a sample is getting the whole population was simply impossible or impractical. We could not go and interview, or in this case, send an online form to every single person in Appalachia. We had to pick a subset just for it to work. The same is true of political polling. The same is true of a lot of human geography data sets, but also applies in physical geography. Think about trying to understand the dynamics of different species. So people may be interested in the migration patterns of elk, for example. You cannot go and put a tracker on every single elk in the world. You just can't do it, it's not possible. So you pick a subset and you go with those that are available. So the first reason for sampling, it's out of necessity. The second reason may seem somewhat odd, but I'll explain within the context of that COVID project. It allows us to get more detail within our survey. This project was led by somebody at WVU Communication Studies, but it has people from geography, as myself, it has people from political science, it has people from psychology, and all of us and others from communication studies, all of us coming together to contribute to this survey, to this research. And in this case, we could have it answer a large range of questions by getting this more detailed information. It has over 100 questions. Again, relating this to the impractical nature, you can't, even if you could get to everybody, the only whole population count in the US is the census, the decennial census. Even then, they have a very small number of questions that they ask because they know if they want to get everyone to respond, they can't ask too many questions. If you're looking at 100 pages, forget it. If there are 100 questions, forget it. You're not going to answer all of that, but 5 questions you might. Therefore, if you want that more in-depth information, you need to use a sample. The third reason we can get repetition. We can do what can be called a panel survey. And that is indeed what we did for this project, where instead of just asking people once, we had it set up in 2-week intervals. So there are, sometimes there'll be 3, sometimes there'll be 4. Ours had 4 different waves. And we went back as the pandemic was unfolding in those early months and asked the same questions to see if people's opinions or actions had changed based upon the case numbers going up, or statements by their governor, or by the president, anyone else. Maybe somebody they knew fell sick. To see over time, did those change? Kind of like with the more detailed questions, it's easier to get that repeated information if you're working with the sample and can go back to the same people instead of just working as a whole. The fourth reason is not quite as relevant for us, but it still is an issue, and especially if you are having somebody go out and do the interviews. If you have somebody who is trained to go out and do the interviews and talk with people or collect the data in a physical geography setting, it can be actually more reliable to have a sample than to try to get the entire population. Taking this idea of reliability from physical geography, it can be, again, instead of the elk, if you're taking soil samples, there would need to be, to ensure that each sample is equivalent to all the other samples, a very specific process of how deep you go, how much you collect. Do you remove the leaves and other litter off the top, or do you include it? All of that process needs to be consistent from one observation in the sample to the next observation in the sample. That's a lot easier if you are doing proper sampling with somebody who is trained to actually do that. And the fifth reason, which again goes back to, we can use the survey that I had. Cost effective. Even if it is theoretically possible to get the entire population, you might need to get a sample just by virtue of being to cut down on costs. this project that I was on with COVID, it came through a National Science Foundation rapid research grant. They gave us a set budget. And we worked with an online surveying firm, Qualtrics, and part of making sure our sample and affecting our sample size is how much money we had, how much we could afford to pay to make sure we got what we wanted. Having a sample made this project cost effective and feasible, even if we could say have somehow convinced Comcast and any other internet provider to, here, let us send this email to a survey to every single person in the country or in Appalachia. That would cost too much. But with the sample, we can do it. We can make it work. So those are 5 reasons to carry out sampling in a project, even though, as we'll see later, it does have uncertainty involved in it. You might need to, if a sample is completely impossible. Even if it is possible, it may only be affordable, or therefore cost effective, to work with the sample. We can get more detailed information with the sample, as well as more reliable information from our sample. And in projects where this is useful, we can also go back to the same sample, the same people, and collect repeated observations to study how things evolve through time. So, thank you for watching. If you have any questions on this or the upcoming videos, as always, feel free to ask during the Zoom class or by email. Thanks. Have a great one.